welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out of school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and this is episode 3 of the Impact Report Debrief series. In episode 2, we focused on the staff debrief process. We talked about creating intentional conversations with your team after a program cycle has ended. So during this debriefing time, we talked about asking your staff reflection questions, gathering honest feedback, identifying operational gaps, and creating space for staff voice to be heard. But today's episode is different because once the staff debrief is complete, leadership has another responsibility. And that responsibility is interpretation. As leaders, our job is to take everything we've heard during the debrief process and turn it into direction. Direction for next semester, direction for next school year, direction for even the summertime. Because feedback without reflection can become overwhelming. You leave the meeting with great ideas, a bunch of notes, observations, and 10,000 suggestions. But then what? How do you organize all that information into actual leadership decisions? That's where today's framework comes in. Today, I'm walking through how leadership can use the 3W's framework after the staff debrief process to reflect strategically and begin planning for the next program cycle. The 3W's are what worked, what didn't work, and what needs to happen next. And today, I specifically want to focus on this from a leadership perspective, not just as a reflection exercise for staff, but as a planning tool for program directors, coordinators, site leaders, and managers. Because strong programs don't improve accidentally, they improve because leaders take time to reflect intentionally. Before we get started and dive into the 3W framework, I wanted to let you know we're doing something a little different this year. We are hosting a virtual brunch and build bootcamp this July. For 4 Saturday mornings from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., we'll be tackling your program's vision, team support, strategic partnerships, and tightening your systems of operation for your youth program for the school year while building community. Full details are coming soon during the end of our debrief series and on our other social media platforms, so stay tuned. All right, everybody, so let's get started. Turn to episode 3 in your digital workbooks to continue following along. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter yet, subscribe and you'll get your copy right away. Okay, so one thing I've learned about youth program leadership is this. The debrief meeting is not the final line. It's actually the beginning of strategic planning. After your staff shares their experience, leadership has to step back and ask, what is the feedback really telling us? Not just individually, but collectively. Because during staff debriefs, patterns start to appear. You begin to hear repeated themes around community, staffing, transitions, scheduling, curriculum, student engagement, training, behavior management, family communications, and or leadership support. And once those patterns appear, leadership has to analyze them. That's why I like using the 3W's framework after the debrief process. It gives leadership a structure for processing all the information that came out of those conversations. Instead of reacting emotionally to every comment, the framework helps leaders reflect strategically. And honestly, this matters because not every piece of feedback requires a complete overhaul. Some things need adjustment, some need deeper investment, some need clearer systems, and there are some things that are working just fine and can stay the same. The 3W's framework helps leaders separate all of that. Now let's dive into what worked. The first question leadership should ask after the debrief process is, what worked? And I think this question is important because leaders often move directly into fixing problems. But if you skip over success analyzing, you'll miss opportunities to strengthen the things already helping your program succeed. So after your staff debrief, go back through your notes and look for repeated positives. What systems consistently supported staff? What routines help students stay engaged? What structures reduced stress? What communication practices worked well? What events or activities had strong outcomes? And last but not least, what leadership decisions positively impacted the team? This is where leadership starts identifying what should be carried into the next year, because not everything needs to be reinvented. As leaders, we need to stop viewing successful systems as accidental. If something worked well, we should identify why it worked and build onto it intentionally. And honestly, this reflection also helps prevent burnout culture. Sometimes leadership gets so focused on gaps that staff never hear about the progress they're making. But acknowledging wins matter. It helps staff feel valued, it improves morale, and it reminds people that growth is happening. Now let's take time to look at what didn't work. In this part of the process, this is usually when the most difficult leadership reflection happens. Because once the debrief is over, leaders have to honestly evaluate where systems broke down. Not where individual people failed, where systems actually failed. That distinction really matters. When reviewing feedback, leadership should look for recurring operational challenges. For example, did communication consistently feel unclear when you were telling staff to complete a task? Were staff expectations inconsistent? Was staff support uneven? Did curriculum planning feel rushed? Did behavior systems lack consistency? And were coordinators overloaded and had no place to go for support? These are the hard leadership reflection questions you have to ask yourself. And the goal here isn't defensiveness. The goal is awareness. One thing I always encourage leaders to do is separate isolated frustrations from repeated patterns. Because if one person mentions an issue, it may simply be personal preference. But if multiple staff members mention the same challenge independently, that's data. And patterns reveal where leadership needs to improve systems. This is also where leaders should ask themselves harder questions like, did we prepare staff effectively? Did we communicate exactly what we wanted? Did we provide enough support? Did our systems match the actual needs of the outcomes that our program desired? Did we respond proactively or reactively all year? Those are important leadership reflection questions, because the strongest leaders aren't the ones who pretend everything is perfect. They're the ones willing to evaluate honestly so next year can improve. Now that that's out the way, let's go ahead and dive into our last W. What needs to happen next? Now in this segment, this is when reflection turns into planning. And honestly, this is the part many organizations skip. I don't know why. They hold the debrief, they gather the feedback, everyone shares ideas, but no actual leadership plan gets created afterwards. The what's next question should help leaders identify priorities for the following year. Not 20 priorities, but realistic priorities. Because if you try fixing everything at once, nothing gets implemented well. Yes. So after reviewing your debrief notes, leadership should ask, what are the top 3 operational improvements we need to make for next year? What systems need redesigning? What training gaps need to be addressed immediately? What should be implemented before staff return? What needs clear structure or documentation? And last but not least, what leadership habits need to improve so I can best support my team. This is where leadership begins creating actual action plans. For example, if staff consistently struggled with communication, your next plan might include weekly leadership updates. If behavior management was inconsistent, your next steps might include updating your behavior protocols, staff training before program launch, and clear student expectations, having the posted so they know it like their first, middle, and last name. So do you see how planning begins to shift the atmosphere? Leadership is no longer simply discussing problems. Leadership is dealing with making the solutions And that's the purpose of debrief reflection, to help leaders move from reaction to intentional planning. Now that we've done the 3W's, let's go ahead and move into your documentation. One thing I highly recommend is creating a shared debrief document or workbook. You can organize it in 3 sections. What worked, list of wins, successful systems, strong events, engagement strategies, so on and so forth. What didn't work, document recurring challenges, communication gaps, operational issues, and some of the barriers that you faced. Then for your what's next, list action items, deadlines, assigned responsibilities, and future planning notes. This becomes incredibly valuable when you begin preparing for the next semester, summer, school year, whatever it may be for your next cycle. Instead of starting from scratch, your team has a roadmap. And honestly, organizations that document consistently tend to improve faster because they're building instructional knowledge. They aren't relying on just one memory. As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to remember this. Debriefing isn't just about reflection, it's about refining. Your staff debrief process should help your organization learn from experiences, strengthen systems, improve culture, support staff, and create better outcomes for the youth in your program. The 3W's framework gives you a practical way to organize those conversations and turn insight into action. So always, after you do your debrief, ask those 3 questions. What worked? What didn't work? What's next? And most importantly, document the answers. Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. If you liked what you heard and you enjoyed our conversation, make sure that you're following us on YouTube, but also hit that like button so we know what you are enjoying. You can also find us on other podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts if you want to listen to our audio version as well. To get more behind the scenes stuff, make sure that you're following us on our social media accounts, Instagram and Facebook at School After Hours. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, y'all. Bye-bye.